Hello, and welcome to another episode of GoodCast, a podcast produced by Goodwill, North Central Texas. It's a show where we take a closer look at the story behind the store and highlight success stories made possible thanks to the generous donations of everyday people. I'm your host, Justin. October is National Disability Employment Awareness Month. This observance celebrates American workers with disabilities and highlights the importance of inclusive hiring practices. The holiday's origins can be traced back to 1945. What started as a week-long effort to encourage the employment of individuals with physical disabilities was expanded to include all types of disabilities in 1962. And 16 years later, Congress extended the observance to cover the entire month of October. Each year, the program is given a central theme to focus on by the Office of Disability Employment Policy, and no matter the size, industry, or organization, people are encouraged to participate and help spread awareness. Goodwill, for its part, has aimed to remove barriers to employment since its beginnings in 1902, and Goodwill North Central Texas has continued those efforts since opening in 1949. Today, we employ over 800 individuals and serve more than 10,000 people with disabilities and other barriers to employment, including veterans, at-risk youth, the homeless, the formerly incarcerated, and disadvantaged each year. That brings us to today's episode. Today we'll be speaking with a number of people, including Kimberly Smith, our VP of Goodwill Staffing Services and Facility-Based Contracts, to talk about some of the work we do on a daily basis to promote inclusivity. We'll also be referring back to previous episodes and topics such as our GSS and youth and transitional programs to hear from individuals who've recently received job placement and training services through Goodwill. So let's get started.
I'm Kimberly Smith, Vice President of Goodwill Staffing Services and STARS. I've been with Goodwill for 23 years now.
Okay. What did you start out doing here?
I actually was a temporary employee.
Okay.
I came to fill in for somebody that was leaving the temp service. Worked for about a month and slowly took on some other duties and became administrative assistant for the Industrial Services Division. And from there was promoted to facility-based contracts manager, went into retail for a year as Kaizen specialist, and then became director of temporary services, finally taking on STARS as well.
So you started off in a temp position and then ended up working here for over 20
I'm
years.
the longest temporary employee that Goodwill has ever had.
What were you doing before? Like other temp positions or?
I worked in a temporary service. I worked for Kelly Services for 13 years, placing people, and then for a local temporary service for another 3 years.
Okay.
And when I came to Goodwill, I actually was a stay-at-home mom for a year.
Okay, awesome. What kind of service does Goodwill provide to people with disabilities?
There's a wide variety of services we offer. The two that I'm over is the temporary staffing service, where we place people into temporary positions mainly with state contracts that are either long-term or temp to hire. Mm-hmm. And then I'm also over the STARS program, which is a life skills program for adults with disabilities, helping them maintain and learn new life skills. Stands for Skills Training Achieves Results.
What's the main difference between like GSS and the contracts that Mark handles?
So GSS are state contracts. Mm-hmm. The state has a program where they set aside different employment opportunities for individuals with disabilities. So 75% of those individuals have to have some barrier to employment. Mm-hmm. Our federal contracting, which is what Mark Fishback's over, is national contracts. Okay. And the severity of the disability has to be documented in such a way as to meet those standards as well.
What kind of positions are being filled with those contracts?
So as far as the state use contracts, people are kind of amazed to learn this, but we do everything from light industrial, janitorial type assignments, all the way up to we have attorneys, engineers, mm-hmm. nurses, and then the in-between gambit there too. You have your administrative assistants, your child support officers, general clerical type nature positions.
And then how are these programs grown or regulated? We have a CARB certification Right. But are there any like state or federal guidelines that we have to meet for our programs, like that sort of thing?
Yes, absolutely. We have state use guidelines that we have to follow. We have to be recertified every 3 years. They also do an annual review, and for both state and federal contracts, we have to report quarterly on the percentage of individuals that have disabilities and their pay rates, the number of hours they work. There's quite a few regulations that we have to follow.
Of course, we should probably take a moment to discuss the Americans with Disabilities Act, which also plays a role with National Disability Employment Awareness Month and was signed into law in 1990. The ADA is a civil rights law that prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities in all areas of public life, including jobs, school, transportation, and all public and private places that are open to the general public. The purpose of this law is to make sure that people with disabilities have the same rights and opportunities as everyone else. For our purposes, we'll take a look at the section of the law that applies to employment specifically. Under Title I, all employers with 15 or more employees should help people with disabilities access the same employment opportunities and benefits available to people without disabilities, provide reasonable accommodations to qualified applicants or employees, and ultimately defer to the ADA when it comes to defining the disability and guidelines for the accommodation process. This title is regulated and enforced by the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission.
We used to be considered facility-based contracts. Individuals would come and work on site, and they would produce pieces of work, and they were paid for those pieces. So David and I were exploring different ways that we could still keep this population and keep them as part of our Goodwill family, but maybe not in the same exact position they had always been in. So we flew out to Colorado Springs, Colorado, and saw a program they had there called Possibilities. And literally on the plane trip home, he and I drew out the outline of what STARS would be. It still, to this day, hangs in our leisure room in the STARS program.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know that part.
It was a very cool experience and one I treasure being a part of.
Okay. And you had quite a few of those, like, people who were on contracts and facilities transfer over to STARS, right?
Almost all of our individuals at that time did. Some of them are still with us working in our centralized processing, in our ebooks and Edgar's Bath Goods. And we still support them in STARS through case management, so they are still part of our program.
You know, my grandma actually is the guardian of a couple of adults with disabilities, and she told me when I first started here that they used to be a part of the facility-based contracts. They lived in Burleson, so I'm not sure
They would have been here.
If she would have driven them up here, but that's pretty cool. I had no idea until she was like, oh yeah, I know all about the stuff that Goodwill does. I was like,
very cool.
Cool.
Small world.
Right. Yeah. Another thing that people with disabilities have to consider when seeking employment is how that will affect their Social Security disability benefits, which is based on disability and work credits through the individual or family's employment. This affects any employee with a documented disability and means that Goodwill staff have to work with individuals to determine the best way for them to have fulfilling employment and maintain benefits they may receive when we're talking about things like temporary staffing services and STARS participants who earn income through Goodwill. And this is different than supplemental security income, which is determined by an individual's limited or inability to receive income and resources. What are some of the misconceptions that folks have about people with disabilities?
I think people tend to look at the disability more than they look at the ability. They have something to offer. Mm-hmm. It's our job to figure out what that offering is.
So what is the ultimate goal for either a STARS participant or someone who is employed through GSS?
So 2 different goals entirely.
Right.
Through Goodwill Staffing Services, if they want it, it's ultimately full-time employment. Mm-hmm. Now, we do have state retirees that worked for the state before, retired, and decided they didn't like retirement as much as they expected. They wanted to work, but they don't want to work full-time. Mm-hmm. In STARS, the ultimate goal is maximum independence, whatever that means to that individual. To be able to live their most fulfilled life, again, by their definitions. When we first started STARS, again, we had been vocationally driven before.
Right.
We had a young man come in, and we sit down and we ask them when they come to us at the first, and then again yearly, what are your goals? What can we help you to achieve? What is it that would make your life fulfilling for you? And his goal was to learn to play the guitar. And that was just fine with us, because if that was going to make his life more fulfilled, we were going to do everything we could to make it happen.
Mm-hmm. Another way that Goodwill serves individuals with disabilities is through the PSAT and WAT programs. PSAT stands for Personal Social Adjustment Training, and WAT stands for Workplace Adjustment Training. In these programs, clients can receive one-on-one group training to learn about job etiquette, work ethics, and job skills. Then, they work with a job coach to receive hands-on training to enable them to work independently. This can be done both at Goodwill, at any of our retail or donation locations, and out in the community through other employers. The goal is for clients to be placed into a competitive, integrated employment opportunity. One example of a client who recently went through the program is Anson Cartwright. Anson received his workplace training with Goodwill's Central Processing Department and quickly impressed the on-site manager. When his time with the program ended, the manager offered him a part-time position, which he accepted. Here's a clip of a recent interview I did with Anson.
My name is Anson Cartwright. I'm 25 years old and I work at Goodwill Industry. I help hang up the hangers and I help other people when they ask me to. I was a little excited and nervous because it was my first time to work at Goodwill. Before I came to work, I was just at home playing games. It feels pretty good, recognized for my hard work. I have more confidence.
For Anson and his job coach, a key factor in his success relied on working on transitional skills that would help him achieve independence. That same idea is true for many of our youth programs that serve individuals ages 16 to 24 with disabilities. We've previously discussed our Camp Independence and Summer Earn and Learn programs, which focus on the transitional period between high school and adulthood. Many of those activities were put on hold in 2020, but thankfully, with help from Workforce Solutions Vocational Rehabilitation, we were able to come back in full swing this year. This summer, we partnered with organizations like Movie Tavern, CVS, the City of Watauga, and the City of Fort Worth, among others, to provide paid work experience and training for young adults with disabilities. These positions ranged from theater hosts to office administrative assistants to the city manager's office. And I got to speak with several of them about their experiences.
I am a hostess here at Movie Tavern in Bedford, and I was here in the Summer Earn and Learn program in 2019. I found out about it from school. My mom wanted to try it, so did I. I really enjoy it.
I actually feel a lot more confident because on the first day I was a little nervous. They've been helpful, giving me time to kick into getting to know the program.
The great thing about Summer Earn and Learn is that students are able to work towards their own goals, both professionally and personally, with help from their job coaches and fellow employees.
This is my first job, so I think I want to learn better communication skills.
I'm going to go to TCC, and then maybe a trade school after that. I'll have the available people skills, and I'll be able to be adaptable. That's a good one. It's fun.
These goals tie in nicely to our next section. This year, the theme for National Disability Employment Awareness Month is America's Recovery, Powered by Inclusion. And according to the Department of Labor's website, this theme reflects the importance of ensuring that people with disabilities have full access to employment and community involvement during the national recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. COVID itself has affected people with disabilities disproportionately to those without, and key areas that need to be addressed moving forward range anywhere from transportation to personal protective equipment to an increased need in accessible forms of technology. The good news is that many of these ideas are things that Goodwill has experience advocating for both locally and nationally, as we've talked about before. Education and employment stand at the front of our expansion efforts for 2021 and well beyond that. For STARS and Goodwill Staffing Services, their goals are just as ambitious.
So in STARS program, my heart's desire would be to be in each community that needs a program like this. For example, prior to COVID, we were looking at opening 2 more locations. There was actually a local school district that was going to give us a building rent-free. As long as we moved in there, we would have to pay for the staff, the utilities, the everyday running of it, but they were actually going to give us a space to move into it. We had another school district in another area that was looking for a building that they could give us for the same purpose. So for me, it would be to go to all these outlying areas and have a STARS program so that it was feasible for individuals to get there from their homes. So I'd love to have STARS all over the Metroplex. So that's my goal for that. For staffing services right now, 97% of our business is state set aside. Mm-hmm. I would like to see us get into a more competitive market and be competing side by side with your Kelly services and your Manpowers and the big boys.
Right.
Yeah.
How did that happen? How does a school district hear about STARS and offer something that feels huge, right?
It was huge. Well, we deal a lot with the school districts because in the special education departments of all these school districts, they have what's called a transitional service.
Okay.
And that is taking the young adults that have, quote unquote, already graduated from the schoolwork part of school, but need to find a transition into adult life. And so the schools are trying to help them gain the skills to do that.
Okay.
And they partner with us and they come to the STARS program. In the Grapevine facility, we also do some contracting work still. So they go and do contracts and they see our program and they come a couple of times a week with their instructor just to get used to being in our environment so that when they do graduate from high school, they have a place to come if they're not going to be able to work in the community.
Okay. That's really cool. I had no.
Yeah, it is cool. It is cool.
So to kind of close us out, if someone was thinking of coming to Goodwill or had a family member or just knew someone who could benefit from our programs, what would you say to them?
There's so much we offer. There are so many different programs that we have. So no matter where you are in life, Goodwill can help you find a path. My own story, I wasn't looking for a full-time job. I was just looking at being temporary and helping out, but there was a path here for me. And I didn't even know I needed it at the time. So whatever your story is, whatever your past is, whatever your ability is, if you happen to have a disability or a barrier, come find us. Because if we can't put you on the path here at Goodwill, we'll find a path for you that's outside of Goodwill. That's how much we care. That's how much our community means to us.
If you haven't already, I'd recommend checking out the Department of Labor's page for National Disability Employment Awareness Month. They've got a ton of resources and educational material that was very helpful in putting this episode together. And you can also download a really cool poster that features this year's theme. With that being said, that's going to do it for us here today. So thank you all so much for listening, and we'll see you real soon. Bye! You have been listening to GoodCast, a podcast produced by Goodwill North Central Texas. To stay up to date on all things Goodwill NCT, be sure to check out our social media and sign up for our newsletter. And if you have a second, we'd appreciate it if you could share the show with a friend or leave us a review on iTunes. It is the fastest way to help the show grow. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find podcasts.